Professor Chiara Cappelletto, who's a professor of aesthetics at the Department of Philosophy at the University of Milan. So thank you so much for joining us, and feel free to share your screen.
So thank you. I have no screen to share for now, just in a few minutes. Thank you, the organizers and the listeners, and I'm very happy to be back here, so it's a nice feeling. I'm going to read as philosophers do. So my research on face mask wearing happens in a time of widespread production and distribution of material and digital prostheses by the wearable technology, the medical device industry, and even fashion. And these prostheses can substitute missing limbs, can implement corporeal abilities, can correct disabilities, can modify the bodily structure, and can expand bodily and cognitive agency. And they go from the exoskeleton to neural link via the smartphone. And all the verbs I've just used, substitute, implement, correct, modify, and expand, imply that the human body is at disposal as a regular object, and that the apps and the wearable artifacts are applied to it or upon it. And it is the old Cartesian scheme of the mannequin and its coat. According to Descartes, when we see outside the window a human being standing alone, we can easily take it as a skeleton wearing some clothes, since we see it as a mere body, as an object. And there is a large and amazing literature referring to the understanding of bodies as dolls, puppets, automatons, just to name a few of them. Despite the fact that technological advancements in the implementation of our bodily and cognitive processes need, this is my view at least, need to be understood for the feedback effect that they exert on the subject involved, the relation between our living body and its tools is still addressed with a third-person perspective. There is the observer, which can be a regular person or a scholar. The observer looks at his or her fellow human entangled with material artifacts and describes this relation from a distance, focusing on the efficiency of this relation. My work over the past decade has been run in a quite different way. I focused from the first-person perspective on the processes of subjectivation of gendered human beings, where bodies are entangled with specific materials and under specific medial conditions. This means that, one, there is no body on which prostheses apply, and two, the body which is entangled with artifacts and media has to be conceived of as virtually mine or even ours. The living body I study is not framed, it is not abducted from the environment, it is rather a situated living agent. And following Heidi and Malafouris, I take human beings and things to be entangled and co-embedded. Not only do humans craft material artifacts, but by interacting with them, they enact new technological abilities that can both enhance and inhibit their initially bodily and cognitive agency. And in other words, artifacts shape the experience humans have of themselves as agents performing a retroactive effect on their sense of bodily and cognitive agency, which participates in their sense of self. The notion of sense of self can be addressed in various ways. For my purpose today, it is enough to recall that bodily self-consciousness is characterized by three main components. The first one is body ownership, that is the identifications with one's own body. This is my body, it's very easy for me to say that. Self-location, that is the experience of where I am in space, and first-person perspective, that is the point of view from which I experience the world. It is well known that these three main components can be affected, hugely affected, by the presence of material artifacts interposed between the outer limit of the user's personal space, which is where my hand ends, and the surrounding environment occupied by things with which the user potentially interacts. As I suggested, referring to Heidi and Malafouris, I'm not alone in designing a fresh investigation on this process of subjectivation. I indeed refer to phenomenology, post-phenomenology, philosophy of technology, material engagement theory, neurocognitive studies, performance studies, and feminist philosophy. So my research is at the moment multidisciplinary, and the future will say if I will be able to transform it in an interdisciplinary one, that is, if I've been able to draw a new epistemic object. The research on face mask wearing and the sense of self participates for me in this goal. I run this research on 3 levels, the theoretical one, the experimental one, and the artistic one. I won't talk about the third one, but we can do it in another moment. So as for the theoretical level, I focus on methodological aspects mostly. And as for the experimental level, I design heuristic strategies and collect data. And together with neuroscientist Marta Calvi at the University of Milan, I run a qualitative research through semi-structured interviews involving 48 participants. And what I will share with you today is very much based on the results of this research, and my future work will develop it. So it is fair to say, and now I am sharing my screen. So it is fair to say that COVID pandemic has played a major role in facilitating my enterprise, since it offered a worldwide social experiment on how people interact with face coverings, or to put it differently, a worldwide experiment, social experiment in shaping strategies in human interaction. My work is not on the religious, epidemiological, social, institutional problems risen by the mandatory use of face masks, but on the impact it had on our bodily awareness and self-narration. Who am I when I am face masked? I'm showing you some of the hundreds of images I collected to illustrate the extent to which face mask has gone far beyond the status of a personal protective equipment to become an artifact of our daily life. As you can see, while the first images taken from the pandemic in 1919 mostly underlined the medical purposes of sanitary masks, in the COVID pandemic, face masks become an object of our visual environment, and at the same time, a material condition granting access to places and an apparel to wear. I mean, an image, a tool, and an accessory, fashioned in different colors and shapes, featured in posters teaching us how to wear it, more or less, being nonetheless used in the more nonsensical way and situations, made object of street art and internet jokes, reused for different purposes, sold in various shops all around the world, available in various disposal, used as a sign for protest. Nobody and nothing have been preserved from face mask wearing, nor dolls or art masterpieces. In Western societies, face masks have been observed and studied as tools for disguise capable of exaggerating features or creating conditions for anonymity. As a result, the bodily experience of the person who wears the face mask has so far been neglected. I consider instead someone whose face is altered as someone altered in his or her bodily agencies. To understand such experiences, I propose the notion of material performative agency. I argue that face mask performs a retroactive effect on the wearer because of its multisensorial components that are olfactory, gustatory, auditory, tactile, and the affordances reasoned by texture, shape, elasticity, size, and weight. And I will summarize such components and affordances as fastidious. They cause discomfort because of this laborious interaction humans have with wearable material artifacts. They cause discomfort because of the laborious interaction humans have with wearable material artifacts directly participates in our engagement with the social environment. Masks are not simply uneasy to manipulate, but also annoying and stressful at the personal and interpersonal level. The face mask is a highly but not entirely ergonomic covering of a body part. It is placed at the threshold between one's own skin and the external environment. And skin is more than an envelope, is more than a boundary between the internal and the external world. Skin is where thermic and tactile receptors are. As for the external world, this is not a landscape. but an environment that can be humid or dry, hot or cold, full of people or empty, framed or unframed. When put on, face mask modifies the wearer's sense of self. Face mask wearing is a bodily habit that impacts on the very constitution of the human self, disrupts it by making the subject aware of him or herself. Usually, the sense of self is transparent, that is tacit, pre-reflective, and taken for granted within the self-narrative. Our transparent sense of self is underpinned by sensory inputs mutually blended and proximal to our body, so to form an experiential transparent background, the core of which is constituted by tactile inputs mediated by the skin. Anna Chaunica even advocates for the extended skin hypothesis. When the touch of textiles wrapping the human body is experienced as comfortable, we are insensitive to them and forget that we are wearing them, so that they can accompany our self-experience in a tacit way, thus expanding it beyond the material border of our body. However, when the proximal tactile experience is uncomfortable, our self-experience is focused on it and becomes opaque, so that its transparency is disrupted. I suggest that when discomfort happens because of the fastidious interaction we have with wearable material artifacts as face masks that directly participate in our engagement with the social environment, these artifacts make the wearer aware of his or her own actual corporeality and disrupt the pre-reflectivity of his or her self-experience. But how these disrupted self relate to another one when being engaged in a gazing loop, when they look at each other? It is by now well known and well established that the bodily self-consciousness depends on someone else gazing back at oneself in presence or at the imaginary level. That can be of interest for the virtual reality studies, by the way. The line of argument whereby others' gaze makes me exist in that I am seen started with Jean-Paul Sartre and Maurice Merleau-Ponty. Sartre described the foundational phenomenological structure according to which being gazed is a precondition of being aware of one's own existence. I quote, "I recognize that I am as the other sees me." And Sartre even used the notion of body seen to formulate an understanding of human interpersonal relations rising in a sighted world where bodies are visible from the outside. And Merleau-Ponty goes on the same line. And recently, Luna Dolezal has developed a quite interesting similar account, speaking of the lived seen body, to describe, I quote, "more than just a visible representation of oneself as seen from a distance perspective. It intrinsically bounds one's lived experience and the lived awareness that one is visible to others." And not only, as Giovanna Colombetti put it, to be seen grants self-awareness, but as Iris Meron-Young summarized, I cannot see myself without seeing myself being seen. I share their ideas totally and subscribe to the understanding that the other's gaze through which one sees oneself can be gendered and culturally biased by worn garments, clothes, and fabrics in general. However, I suggest that people do not simply experience their body seen in as so much as it falls in the visual spectrum of the onlooker, as if it were available in plain sight, conceptualized a priori as plainly gazeable in and for itself, as lived flesh in its, let's say, nudity somehow. I rather make the hypothesis that face mask wearing fashions the experience of being seen accordingly to the material experience we have of the artifact, which activates the reflective relation between the living body that accompanies and shapes my action and the body I act upon. And with Marta Calvi, I gathered conspicuous evidence from the perspective of the first person of both naive and experienced participants, whereby carrying on the face mask on the lower part of the face in daily life situation strongly impacts on its wearer facial expression production and triggers a feedback effect on facial expression self-awareness. Participants' assessment strongly confirmed the relevance of the other's gaze to make me exist in that I'm seen. However, they do so via negativa, by highlighting the failures of the standard gazing loop in the specific conditions under scrutiny. According to the interviews, the reason why face mask wearers' facial expression production is modified is not that the onlooker vision is impaired, rather interviews consider themselves not gazeable, in so much they are made unseeable by their face mask wearing. We understand that such an impact is due to the material agency of the face mask. The impossibility of being gazeable because of the interference of the material artifacts on our face makes us opaque to ourselves. And such an opacity sustains the disruption of the wearer's facial expression self-awareness, again, due to a material invisibility. The feedback effect of disruption caused by face mask wearings makes the wearer experience of his or herself face as materially and visually undone. And participants' responses leave no doubt that they fully acknowledge this process of defacement. We therefore understand facial expression production as experienced as a whole bodily habit which is affected by the material artifacts with which people interact, here epitomized by the face mask. To be able to be seen is a condition highly dependent from the material constraints the whole living body experiences and their feedback effects. Self-apprehension, while dependent on the other's gaze, happens in an environment where the bodily self-awareness can be inhibited and or enhanced by the feedback effects material artifacts exert upon us, making the other gaze experienced as blind, even though it's not. The bodily and material conditions under which we expose ourselves to onlookers actually shape our experience of being seen. And I intend to further investigate these questions to favor heuristics based on the feedback loop of material artifacts with which the situated self is entangled, apt for an ecological understanding of the self-cognitive and affective agency displayed in the interpersonal relationships. I will argue that artifacts are better to be considered as materialized habits, starting from simple body performances as wearing up to grasping. A whole new approach to the human-machine interaction can be developed, which take into consideration not the mere efficiency of the interaction, but the very impact on our human constitution. And this will have many implications on the way we design, develop, experience, and integrate these artifacts in our individual lives, as well as in our social relations with other humans, other machines, and hybrid artifacts. And the better understanding of the embodied, situated first-person perspective will provide, I hope, a new perspective on the way humans and technology will co-evolve. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chiara, and other questions and comments. I do have one, but I'm sure I'm not the only one, so perhaps I'll start. So, well, it's really interesting, and I can only bring some questions and let's from the perspective I know, and I think interestingly you have an approach which is very close to the distinction of George Herbert Mead between the me and the I, right? The I as the actor and the me as what you are perceived as. So it seems that you're pursuing two branches that corresponds to this I and the me, and the I is about what you call the sense of self and in action, and how in a way mediated by some kind of artifact, the interaction with the environment through the perception action loop changes. And of course, ipseity is the history of your own experience of interaction with the world. And so if you change something in the perception action loop, you're changing something about what oneself is. we will have longer discussions about this, but I would really recommend that if you don't already have done it, you have a look at the work of Bakirita in terms of substitution. Bakirita is the guy who made blind people see with the skin and then with the tongue. And he showed very interesting things about how the world that you perceive depends on the degrees of freedom that you have in terms of perception of the environment. So if and what you can actually create as objects depends on how much you can act on them. So, for example, the blind people who could move and zoom their cameras when they were using it as a direct interface with their brain would be able to recover the capacity of having these objects, even if there was a change of sensor, right? Or if but so action is absolutely critical. And the recent continuator of this work is Charles Lenay at the University of Compiègne. And he's done wonderful things, not just about the degrees of freedom and the nature of perception through mediated artifacts, but also about what is the relation with the other. And I'm coming to my second point about the me. And so this idea that the way you're perceived by the other, which and the encounter, and there's a work about the phenomenology of encounter by Frederick Buitendick, and maybe you have read about precisely the notion of reciprocal gaze. But what Lenay showed is that the perception of the other as a living being depends on the reaction of the other to your reaction. And precisely that's exactly what you're showing here with the mask, is that if you cannot have facial expression in a reaction, then it seems trivial, but the interaction with the other suddenly loses a lot of its depth and quality. So I would really, suggest that you look at that. And there is probably somebody, but you already know that author, which is Jacob von Uexküll, who wrote really fascinating things about these notions of perception, not just in his most famous work about the Umwelt, but in his theoretical biology. And the first chapters are about precisely the connections between philosophy and perception in the consciousness of one's being. So I think it would be interesting to discuss this, to look at this. So thank you so much. But it's a very large project with these two branches. So I hope you manage to do this in a month. Yeah.
I thank you. I know it's very large. It's too large, but since I have the opportunity to share it with you, I took it. So thank you for all the references you gave me. As for the first, just as a reaction, for the first issue, freedom is for me a huge problem, because if I am honest and I follow my line, where can I say that the human agency stops? Because if you really think that I can say I am or I do, if you really assess this idea and say I can only say something regarding myself depending on the relation I have with the environment, the materials, and even the media. So am I able to place myself anywhere, or should I think just in terms of a permanently displaced subjectivity? This is both a methodological problem and also an ontological one. So I just want to be. I know this is the final problem, and this is a problem that tackle even the idea of freedom, because somehow the idea of freedom requires a distance, a limitation, and a full agency of the subject. So I have no answer. I just know what the limits of this perspective are. You can answer the law is the response. You know, the point is, yes, there is a distributed agency, and you have to regulate it by law. I'm not buying it. I just say this is a possible path, which is for me is not so interesting, but I would understand the rationale of it. As for the problem of the phenomenology of the encounter, what was very interesting to me is that the fact that we always conceive the seen body as gazeable, and when we do that, we think it as somehow, even today, somehow as a natural body, a body that it is conceived in order to be gazed or looked at. And the fact that when you are remade, altered by a material artifact, the fact that the alteration that you endure modify your experience of being gazed, even when the other people are actually looking at you. This is for me very, very, very interesting, because the onlooker is not blind. It's not. I mean, it's in front of you, looking at you with all his. He's fully acknowledging your presence. Still, the fact that you are materially that you know you are materially invisible, and you know it because your body is telling that to you, because you are swelling, you are uncomfortable. The mask is, it's just fastidious. This fact is for me very, very interesting, because somehow it requires a different inquiry on the gazing loop, on this basic gazing loop, on which we rely so much.
Well, thank you. I think what's fascinating in your project is its empirical founding.
Yes.
That is because philosophy has no answers, but you might find some.
Yeah. Yes, I take it.
Ben.
Great. Can you hear me okay? Great. Yeah, thank you so much. That was really interesting. This is quite outside my area, but coming at this as an anthropologist, I mean, anthropologists have been fascinated by, masks and masking from a cross-cultural point of view for a very long time. And I was just thinking about, the culturally situated nature of some of the models of personhood that you're describing, and the COVID is an interesting example because it was a pandemic. It happened everywhere. And yet experiences of what masks came to mean and represent and attitudes towards masks and masking were very different. Much was made about East Asian societies being, say, more, relatively more compliant is one word, but willing to adopt masks. And the relationship between, say, cultural understandings of what a mask is, or what revealing the face actually is relative to what the self means. So I guess I was just wondering if you had any reflections on locating your study. I mean, I'm not sure about the data, whether it's all from one context, but perhaps whether you can situate it as part of a specific kind of cultural idea about what masks mean relative to the body.
Sorry, thank you. So we reviewed all the literature, and there are no actual studies on these kind of issues in the pandemic situation. I mean, so there are no studies that worked on the difference between Far Eastern population and Western ones in wearing face masks. That said, I mean, my research is a Western one. I totally assume that it is a Western one. And when I say that, I mean that for us, the face is the locus of identity. And I don't want to counter it. I want to investigate. I want to inquire in it and ask, are we really sure that face, this part of our body, is actually the locus of our identity? And if yes, from a phenomenological viewpoint, why? Can we work on other loci of identity, other body parts that can maybe provide us with other insights on our bodily experience of ourselves? So I totally agree with your point, but that can't be mine in some way. And I stand within the phenomenological tradition, which is a Western one, and as the post-phenomenological tradition is a Western one. But I want to challenge the idea that face is by nature the locus of identity. And the fact that when your face is covered, all your identities is somehow altered. Well, this is interesting to challenge this presumption.
Any other questions? Or we're actually a bit beyond time, but well, okay, Marco.
Well, thank you. Thanks a lot, Chiara. That was super, super interesting. And of course, I'm trying to see whether, I mean, just like some questions that I have are kind of make sense in the context of a philosophy discussion, which is currently in research. But I was really interested in your theoretical point about agency. At what point does agency really stop? And I was thinking, what's wrong in thinking or assuming that our own identity exists in relation to others' perception of ourselves? So suppose we bring this to the extreme. Would this be just like possible to simply assume the following, that we exist exclusively in relation to the other, and as a result of the other perception of ourselves?
No, there is nothing wrong. It just goes against everything we just said for the last 2,500 years. So it's not easy to manage that, because all our main concepts are based on the fact that we can have to assume our thoughts, our desires, our actions. So, I mean, I just think that I have to be very, very well aware of what this implies, not to stop this. And this is one answer. The other one is, okay, still, we don't live in a everything is not blurred. So there are crises that through which we identify different agents. So one thing is saying we are interconnected, we are entangled. There is a permanent feedback loop between living human beings, other living beings, and artifacts. And another thing is say everything is blurred. There are no boundaries, because this is not true. One extremely interesting case is pregnancy, for example. And I work on it also, because there you have a case study of one individual who becomes another one, still remaining itself. So this is a nice, very difficult case that helped this kind of discussions.
Thank you again. Well, thank you to all the colleagues who presented today. Thank you to the audience for the questions.